Hi, I'm Jack O'Brien, and this is my life in the theater. You can't take it with you. I can't, as a matter of fact. This was Ellis Rabb's accidental triumph with the APA Repertory Company. I was the only assistant. They couldn't afford more than one. I would have done anything to join this company. They were the resident theater company at the University of Michigan, where I was an undergraduate and a graduate. And because I was very active on camera, so this will surprise you, in theater, they had me go to fraternity and sorority houses at dinner time and sell tickets for this company that was coming to Ann Arbor as our resident group. I guess if I had an epiphany of sorts in my life, this would have been it. I had seen a lot of theater. I had studied sort of accidentally, not intentionally, at Michigan. I had a pretty good singing voice. I did musical comedy. And then I saw this company. And they were incandescent. Ellis Rabb, Rosemary Harris, Nancy Marchand, Will Geer, all of these extraordinary men and women who fairly early in their careers chose to band together to do classical work and travel around the country. It's a traveling group. Nobody does this anymore. Playing repertory. I was besotted. I did whatever I could. I walked the dogs. I ordered groceries. I drove the car. I couldn't get enough. And eventually, I wore Ellis down. He didn't like me much at the top. He loved telling people years later. I really didn't like him much at the beginning. But I persevered. And I became the single assistant director in this extraordinary young company. And I look at You Can't Take It With You, which actually we had run out of money. I think we'd applied for a Ford Foundation grant. And we didn't get it. And it was to move from off-Broadway to a Broadway theater for a run. We didn't get the grant. And I was on a vacation with Ellis, carrying the luggage in those days. And we got the call that I had to come home. We had a meeting. It determined that we would go to Ann Arbor, where we played a season, the last season. And there was no more money, and we did various plays. And the last play we did was You Can't Take It With You. And Ellis did the most amazing thing. He was a fantastic, magical, insane, inspiring guy. He said, I want this to look as if it's been in the repertory for as long as the Seagull has with the Moscow Art Theater. And the way to do that is to take the French's acting edition, which has the instructions, cross here, sit here, she comes in, she's carrying whatever. Those are actually the stage manager's notes from the original production. And the original production was directed by George S. Kaufman, one of the two authors, Moss Hart and George S. Kaufman. So here, hidden in this book, was the direction of George S. Kaufman, who wrote the jokes. For instance, top of the show, there's a swinging door to the kitchen. And if it's staged right, which is where it was originally and where we put it, somebody goes out and somebody comes in. And it's a joke in and of itself. We meticulously followed this. And then Ellis, because he was a romantic and he was a modern person, redid the love story, some of the activity to his own specifications. Well, we opened literally a 6-week run Ellis said, let's go into New York and show them who we are, right? So in we went, and it was a huge hit. It ran like 2 years. It filled the coffers. It sustained us to become one of the first, if not the first, yes, repertory company in New York since the Civic Theater of Eva Le Gallienne. Simultaneously, Lincoln Center was starting at the same time. And so one of my closest friends in the industry is director Dan Sullivan. We were like twin brothers who grew up all these years in separate repertory companies. There are no more anymore, but the two of us are still on the hoof. You can't take it with you. One of the great experiences of my life. Okay, there's a musical. Oh, I have to go over here. This is, in fact, where it begins. Sean O'Casey's Cockadoodle Dandy was a play I did for APA at the Lyceum Theater when I was 29 years old. I had been everybody's assistant since Jesus lost his sandals, and I never got my own show. And of course, Ellis, being my sort of creative father, you know how that goes. You can't get a show from your dad. John Houseman, who was our producer at the time, I think thought that I was probably talented and that I'd done enough. And there had to be an extra play for the season in Ann Arbor. And he chose the Sean O'Casey comedy, which is very anti-Catholic. Not a good idea for the New York Times at the time, since the critic was a profound Catholic at the time. But we did this piece. That was my debut. That's 1969. That's the very beginning. Prior to that, I was a lyricist with jazz artist Bob James. We were roommates in college. We did a couple of shows in college that won awards. We thought we were going to be Lerner and Lowe. We were asked to do some political songs for an adaptation of Joe McGinnis's The Selling of the President. This is in the early 70s. The songs were really good, and I blush to say even now, people who hear the score think, those songs are really good. They really were. The show was not good. The book was not good. I started as a lyricist, and then as people fell off the wagon along the way, on the way to New York, I then became the book writer, and then I became the director, and then just before we opened, I was helped lighting the show because my lighting designer had hepatitis. I was all alone in the ruins. It lasted 5 performances at the Schubert Theater. I'm amazed I'm sitting up now after that disaster. But you're as fond of maybe even fonder of the failures than you are of the successes. Because failure teaches you what you don't know. Success just feels good. So I have great affection for these two pieces. Porgy and Bess, that made my reputation. I was working as a sort of dog's body at the American Opera Center at Juilliard. After APA finished, John Houseman, who, as I say, was one of my mentors, brought me to Juilliard to work with the students. And there was an opera wing called the American Opera Center. And that gentleman saw my work and asked me to do a 1-act opera called Il Cordovano by Geoffrey. Doesn't matter. It was never done again. I'll think of it. Or maybe I won't think about it because I don't want to burden you with things that you don't need. It was, the El Cordovano means the tapestry. It's a comedy. Not a single laugh. But the musical director was John DeMaine, who, as a young Turk in the music business, happened to be the musical director of the Houston Grand Opera. It was the centennial, the bicentennial celebration, and the Houston Grand Opera wanted to do the uncut Porgy and Bess, something Gershwin himself never heard. It was always cut before it was ever produced. They wanted Hal Prince to direct. Who wouldn't? But Hal, at that time in his career, was booked. And they kept saying, surely you can squeeze this in. It's only 3 weeks. He couldn't do it. He really couldn't do it. Now, oddly enough, The Selling of the President was actually produced out of the Hal Prince George Abbott office by a young producer named John Flaxman and Harold Hastings, who was a conductor for Hal Prince at that time. So Hal knew me. They couldn't remember my name. It's a little bit like, Jeffrey. Yeah, I still can't remember his name. They couldn't remember mine either. And so Hal said to him, isn't there somebody that you've seen that you think could do this? And they said, well, there's this young Irish kid, O'Reilly. He seems promising. And Hal said, go with your gut. If you think you can do it, because I can't. They hired me. I was the last person hired for this revival, and the whitest person you've ever seen in your life. The interesting thing was, for 20 years, Porgy and Bess had been directed in a contract by a woman who was this production stage manager for the tour that went to Russia, Bobby Breen's production. And Truman Capote wrote a book called The Muses Are Heard, and it was Leontine Price and William Warfield. It was a great, great success. And the Russians were seeing American music for the first time. That stage manager got her name in the rights. And for 20 years, she directed all the revivals of Porgy and Bess until me. She was contemptuous of black singers. She was insulting. She didn't care about them. She was rude. And at that time, if you were a black opera singer, you either went to Europe to try to make your career, or you were in Porgy and Bess, because that's all you could get. The first day of rehearsals, I said to them, assembled these beautiful singers, gorgeous singers. I said, I'm not sure I even belong here, but I know that this is about a community, and I'm not a member of your community. You'll have to help me. If you'll tell me when I'm right and when I'm wrong, we'll be okay. Whether they were gobsmacked. No one had ever asked their opinions. They just told them. If I have a validity as a director today, it's because of those people who taught me honesty, who taught me compassion, who answered my questions from their heart. If I could revive any one of my works, this is the one I would do. I can't, it's too late, but it was amazing. It really was amazing. Into the Woods by Steve Sondheim. The phone rings at one point. I'm the artistic director now in the 80s of the Old Globe in San Diego. And the call, I think, was James Lapine. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Steve. They had done workshops of Into the Woods, and they'd done a reading at Lincoln Center. And they asked if, conceivably, we would be interested. Oh, maybe. The entire movement of the regional theater started then. By that I mean, usually the regional theaters got shows 2 or 3 years after they closed in New York and toured. No one was creating work out there. No one. And we were 3,000 miles away from the critics in New York. No one was going to come out and see us. They had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do. We announced that we were doing it. The next morning, there was a phone call for tickets for the opening of Into the Woods from Australia. The entire theater flipped, and the blooming, gorgeous, creative, fecund, amazing result of how theater is generated now around the globe, and certainly around the United States, started right there. Pretty good, huh? 2 Shakespearean actors. Okay. I'm on a plane to London, and I don't know why. Maybe it had to do with Porgy, because we were doing a tour over there. And I get a call saying there's a play being done at the Barbican by an American playwright who had just done a workshop there. And it was a huge success, and they were bringing it to New York. I happened to get a copy. I'm in London on my way to New York. I'm sitting near an aisle seat, and next to me, asleep, is John Goodman, whom I had known from my early days. We did a couple of shows together before I went to the Globe in the 80s, I think. John had just completed a movie and was asleep, slept the entire time. I opened a copy of this play Richard Nelson has written called 2 Shakespearean Actors. It's about the Astor Place riots, something I knew nothing about. Apparently, of a weekend, the leading English actor, Charles McReady, was doing Macbeth down at the Astor Place Theater, and across the way, Edwin Forrest, the American star, was doing Macbeth. Brits against the English, the Americans. There was a riot. People were harmed. I think a few people were killed, if I'm not mistaken. This is the sort of thing, it just irritates me. This is the sort of thing the Brits do so brilliantly. They farm their entire world. They have plays about the royal family that they put on. Do we do that? No, we don't. I don't know why. We're a very rich, very imaginative, very exciting group of people, but we don't have that ability. Richard Nelson wrote this play, and I had called Gregory Mosher, who was running Lincoln Center at the time. Now, Gregory had been in a production of mine at Juilliard, Charlie's aunt, right? So I knew him. And I said, look, who's directing this play? And he said, the original British director. I said, you can't do this. It doesn't have to be me. It could be Dan Sullivan. It could be Mark Lamos. It could be any one of us here who have done a lot of Shakespeare. But this is our world. These are our people. Please don't do this. He said, look, Jack, I understand your passion, but I can't say to the director who did it in London, you're not wanted on the voyage. So I swallowed hard and hung up. 3 weeks later, phone rings. Greg says, he can't do it. It was mine. I had 28 actors for a play on Broadway. It starred Brian Bedford and Victor Garber. And almost everybody you can think of. Katie Finneran made her debut in that. Judy Kuhn had 2 lines. Everybody was in it. It was gorgeous, gorgeous. And my favorite thing is, the night that it closed, it sold out, right? And we can't extend. And a young man approaches the box office at 10 before 8 and says, do you have a couple of seats for John Kennedy? Oh, they found 2 seats for John Kennedy. I love the fact that he scammed 2 seats to see the last performance. It was great. Okay, here's Damn Yankees. I'm at the Old Globe in San Diego, right? Must be around the 90s. I'm directing my first Othello. Paul Winfield is my first Othello. Thank you very much. So, and I'm having a wonderful time. Fabulous play. My business partner comes into the rehearsal and says, would you like to direct the revival of Damn Yankees? Now, when I was 17 years old, I went to this tent in Clio, Michigan, and saw Damn Yankees. And there was an actor there named Lester Rollins, who was not a singer, playing the devil. Now, I'm 17, I don't know anything about the theater. He does in the second act, he does a number called The Good Old Days. There were Indians dragging an empty covered wagon when scalping the settlers was the latest craze, right? He does this vaudeville number in the second act. The audience goes pig, stick, nutty. They stand, they scream, they split their gloves. He gets a reprise, gets another version. And I thought to myself, I didn't know that that's planned. I didn't know that's the way Broadway worked. I thought he was so good in that performance that they accidentally said, sing it again. Obviously, Damn Yankees made an impression. My partner says, you want to do this? I said, oh yeah, I think I do. He said, well, you have to go to New York tonight and meet the composer and maybe George Abbott, who wrote and directed it, and get their approval. I said, I'm directing Othello, I can't. He said, they don't know their lines yet. Why don't you just give them a day to learn their lines, and you can come back in 24 hours. Okay. So I get on the plane, I open the copy of The Damn Yankees, and the book is so dated, you wouldn't believe it. And there's a thing at the end that I thought, oh, I can't do this. At the end of the show, Joe, the young ball player, has a number with the handmaiden of the devil, who was Gwen Verdon. They do Two Lost Souls, big number, the 11 o'clock number. The next scene, he goes home as an old man. The spell has changed. He's gained his age again. The miracle is over. The Yankees won the pennant, or did not win the pennant, they lost it. And he goes home to his wife. And his wife says, I don't know where you were. I never want to know. Don't please tell me. I thought, you can't say that on a stage anymore. Do you know how? You can't. I mean, we're now realizing how stupid and unwoke we've been for so many centuries. You can't make fun of marriage like that. So I sit down in a room with George Abbott, who's 105, and his wife, Joy, and our producers. I can't remember if Richard, the composer, was there or not. I don't think he was. And I start to pitch. And I get to this moment, and I say, Mr. Abbott, we can't do that. And he says, why not? And I thought, I don't think I can explain this to him in a way that isn't insulting to his dignity, his history, his reputation. I can't tell him the world has moved on, and we don't do that anymore. And my producer at the time said, you know, why don't you do a revision on the book and send Mr. Abbott the pages, and maybe he'll say, okay. I thought, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. But I went back to San Diego and wrote the first 18 pages all over again. Victor Garber is making the movie Titanic down in Mexico on the coast, has nowhere to go. We're old friends. He's staying with me. So I'm giving him these pages, and he's saying, this is really good. I want to do this. So we sent the pages to Mr. Abbott, and he didn't say no. He said, do more. So I rewrote this. Because it was George Abbott, and he was 105, they would not allow me to share credit with him. I understood that. I was nobody at the time. Conceivably, I'm still nobody to George Abbott. But I realized that to tie myself to the rights was out of my realm. They paid me handsomely to direct it. It ran 2 years. Victor Garber was replaced by Jerry Lewis. That's another story. And Jerry Lewis was on the road for 2 years playing the devil and paying my dog's food for very happily. So that was the first time, basically, I think, I registered in New York. To land a major musical on Broadway to the critics, if it's a revival and you do it, that's great. If it's a new one, that's the top. But that's the big prize. That's the money. So that solidified that part of my. This is so much fun. Here comes the full Monty. Here comes the Invention of Love. And I'm going to have to hop, skip, and jump because I could be here for 3 days with these. The full Monty, the thing I loved about the full Monty was very often you end up working with your friends. One of my closest friends, because he produced all the television versions I did for great performances, was a television producer named Lindsay Law, who had gone to the West Coast to start Searchlight Films, Fox Searchlight Films. He did it for 10 years. So he's in Los Angeles and I'm in San Diego. And we were roommates at one point. We know each other really well. He calls me on the phone. He produced the Full Monty movie, huge hit. He calls me up and he says, there are all these requests to make this into a musical. They're asking me to do it. And I'm thinking, maybe we should make it into a musical. And I said, I got a barn right here. We can do it here in San Diego. In the old days, in the 20s and the 30s, composers would say to each other, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Ethel Merman doesn't have anything to do next year. Let's write her a show. They'd sit down and write a show for Ethel Merman. And it would be, Call Me Madam, or, hunting. She did something with hunting in it. What is it? Happy Hunting, yeah, who cares? It took a year to do that. Now, sometimes it takes upwards of 12 years to get a show on Broadway because you rewrite and you have to raise the money, it's very expensive, it's very involved, it's not what it once was. I said to the guys, Terrence McNally, God rest his soul, was the book writer. And I said, let's get this on next year. Let's just do it. Who's going to do the music? We thought, this is like 1998 and 1999. We're going to crest in the new century. I said, well, this score doesn't feel like Cy Coleman. It doesn't feel like anybody I can think of. Maybe we should have a new composer. Adam Gettle was reviving his production of Floyd Collins at the Globe at that time. And I thought, there's a brand new guy, let's try him. I gave him the book to read. He called me the next day and he said, I think this is one of the best books I've ever read for a musical, but I'm doing something called Light in the Piazza, and I really can't, I'm not available right now. But I have a friend named David Yazbek. He knows, this killed me. He knows his music has edge, and he knows the hook of a song. There speaks a professional. Music got edge, knows how to. I called him up on the telephone. I said, can you send me some material? He did. 3 of the songs are in the show now. That was David's and my first experience together. We did other shows together down the line. Maybe they'll appear if I go quick enough. And at the moment, he's doing the sound, the track, the back of the music for my production of The Roommate. years later. Okay. The Invention of Love. Oh my God. Oh my God. I think it's the most beautiful show I ever did. I'm not sure other people would agree, but I do. I had done a play at Lincoln Center called Hapgood by Tom Stoppard, which was about, well, what was it about? Twinning, physics. I mean, Tom never writes a play about one thing. He writes conceptually about a lot of things. There's a woman at MI5 who is a spy. She runs the spy ring. She has a twin. So the show's about twinning. Anyway, we did this very difficult show that Tom called his loose tooth at the Mitzi at Lincoln Center Theater. And it was a bit, Stockard Channing was my leading lady. It was a big hit. I became friends with Tom Stoppard. And the designer was the Irish genius, Bob Crowley. We've done a ton of stuff together. We're like family. Crowley does the set, and Tom is there, and we have a success. Years later comes this play called The Invention of Love. And Lincoln Center, my beloved Andre Bishop, said, this is for you to do. I did not understand it at all. It's about the poetry of A.E. Housman. It's about Oxford. It's about philosophy. It's about homosexuality. At the time, it's about a whole bunch of recondite, complicated, difficult things. I went to London to see it. John Wood was playing the main part, the leading part. I saw it 3 times in London, once at the National, twice in the West End. I fell asleep each time, down, could not get through it, could not get through it. Bob Crowley and I sat in my apartment thinking, what are we going to do? We read the play to each other, and we had colored Post-its. And if it was a satiric scene, we put a pink one. If it was realistic, we put white. If it was philosophic, we put in blue. We actually did a design that said, if we don't understand it, how do we make this work to the audience? And of course, I don't know about you, but when I was at the university, everybody was sexy. Even the nerds were sexy. We were all in school away from home for the first time, out from under our parents, and we're flexing our muscles and we're unfurling our feathers and we're impressing each other. I remember it as being so beautiful. And so we made that piece beautiful. And to this day, it's one of them. I think it's one of the most beautiful things I ever touched. I was very proud of it. Hairspray. Okay. When I die, which is probably the end of the week, we don't know, my obit will say the director of Hairspray. Even though there's a lot of other stuff here. That's the way it's been. One of the happiest experiences of my life, we went to Seattle. I got to tell you one story. We go to Seattle, we're in previews. Jerry Mitchell and I are working together for the first time. We adore each other. We're both from Michigan. We're both sort of similar energies. Scott Whitman and Mark Shaman are the composers. One of the most beautiful scores ever done. There's Terrence McNally. It's everybody. We're all there together, right? Well, the first preview happens. It's okay. The second preview, I think it was the second or the third. The Gay Men's Chorus is in the audience. They come because we had no advance. Nobody knew about the show. They went bananas. The whole audience went bananas. They wouldn't leave the theater. After the curtain call, the company waved and went to take their clothes off, and the audience wouldn't leave. They were down there screaming and cheering and carrying on. And finally, the stage manager went up to Harvey Fierstein's dressing room, who's now ready to go home, and said, you must go down there and tell them to go home because they won't go. So Harvey went down to the stage, thanked them all, and said, okay, the next day at the note session, there were some adults, Jackie Hoffman, Harvey, Linda Hart, and there were a lot of kids. And if you look that cast up, almost all of them became stars. All of them have huge careers now. I said to them, I don't know how to explain this to you. Something is going on that none of us, older people, have ever seen. We have to take care of this. This is amazing. And it still is. We're hoping to revive it next year. If we possibly can. We're trying to do that. Henry IV, I did, this is a fascinating situation for me. I had done it at the Globe, and Dakin Matthews did a version of both part 1 and part 2. And it started at 7:30 in natural light outside, and it was like 3.5 hours, right? And John Goodman was my Falstaff, and it was a spectacular show. Andre Bishop, who loves this play, came out to see it. Several years later, Kevin Kline, who was very close to Andre and me, because he's part of that original Juilliard crowd that I was working with, comes to Andre and says, I would like to play Falstaff. And Andre says, well, let's get Jack. And he knew me. And so my second Falstaff was Kevin Kline. I mean, not only did I get the opportunity to do it twice, I did it with two of the greatest American actors we'll ever seen. They were both brilliant. They were diametrically opposed. And that was another, that's a Tony, and that was a Tony. And like within 2 years, amazing. Here's Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. The thing to say about Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is, Mike Nichols told me, you're going to get the Tony. He and Diane saw a preview. And then he got the Tony for, the Clop, Clop, Clop. Spamalot. Oh. Spamalot. He won for Spamalot that year. He thought I was going to win. Here are our friends again. David Yazbek, our second show. Jerry Mitchell, maybe our third or fourth by that time. David Rockwell, that's our second or third design with him. These are all friends. These are all people that, if you're lucky enough, you get to another round with. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. I just loved it. Norbert Leo Butz, we met for the first time. He won the Tony for it. And then I cast him again with the same group of people in Catch Me If You Can. He won the Tony there. So hop, skipping, and jumping through this weird career are these little oases of pals and friends because you've had a really good time and you want to do it again. When I ran the Globe, I was very careful not to do that because I felt that the regional market belonged to all the American artists. And even though I had my prejudices and my favorites, I thought it was unfair that that landing space for art was not available to people different from me and other artists whose work I didn't know. But when it came to commercial work, when I can have my friends, I choose to have my friends. Here it is again. This is the second group, Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard writes a trilogy called The Coast of Utopia about the dawning of the intellectual movement in Russia, right? It's done in London in 3 different plays that played marathons at the National by Trevor Nunn. And Andre Bishop says, and God rest his soul, Bernie Gersten, the two of them were so inspiring and so exciting. Do this play. So Bob Crowley and I go to see a matinee in London. I mean, of the full day. Starts at 11, gets out at like 11. And there's a dinner break and all this. And Tom has a car waiting for us to go out to Chelsea Common, where he lives, to give us midnight supper to discuss this. We had no idea what we were looking at. I didn't understand. The entire thing was over both of our heads. We knelt in the cab and pledged, let's not do this. We can't do this. We don't have time. I don't know how to study this. We don't belong doing this. Right? Right. Tom gives us a glass of wine, and we're 20 minutes, we're saying, we're doing it with you. That's what kind of backbone I have. But here's the deal. That company, Ethan Hawke, Billy Crudup, Richard Easton, Jennifer Ely, Martha Plimpton, and on, Josh Hamilton, on and on and on. Brian O'Byrne. These young, with the exception of Richard, probably, aspiring, talented people gave me a year of their lives to do these 3 plays. And for that year, I had my own American national repertory company. They eschewed television, film. I don't know why they did. It wasn't that big a hit in London. It got respectful reviews. Bob Crowley and I, now this is our 3rd or 5th production together, so we're now like an oiled machine. I had 3 lighting designers because no one could give up a year of their lives to do it. So Brian McDevitt, Kenny Posner, and Natasha Katz each took one of the plays and together made a lighting plot for all of them. It was unprecedented. On the opening night of the first play, I was in the little office off the lobby studying the second play. On the opening of the second play, I was in that office studying the third. And when they all opened together, there was a day when Tom came to New York and we saw a marathon. It happened to be a day that next door at the Metropolitan Opera was my production of Il Trittico with James Levine conducting, which I had done just after. At the beginning of the third play, I'm sitting with Tom in the back. I excuse myself. I go out through the lobby, the basement of Lincoln Center, over to the Metropolitan Opera, open the door. I hear thundering applause. Jimmy Levine reaches through the curtain. I go out and take a curtain call for the televised version of Il Trittico, which I did not see. Thank you, folks. Glad you liked it, right? Come back through the curtain, hug 2 or 3 people, go back through the bottom of the basement, around the parking lot, back into the Beaumont Theater, cross in front of Tom, sit down and finish the marathon. 2 triples in one day. It's got to be the greatest day of my entire life, until now. Shucked. Shucked is the single funniest show I've ever done. Robert Horn wrote this hilarious show. Mike Bosner, who's a brilliant producer, got these remarkable kids from Nashville, Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally, to write it. Robert Horn wrote one joke after another. We went to Utah, out of town, to keep under cover of night because we didn't know what we had. And I thought, the people in Utah, they're real. They're not sort of jaded. This is a very good idea. And also, they're rather polite. And so the raciness of this will be a real test of their endurance. But they loved it. We came in, and I would go at night and watch the show. And I have to say this, we were about to revive it again. It's going on a national tour. Look for it. And then it's going to London. Look for it. There are 178 laughs in that show. I counted them. It didn't matter who showed up. It didn't matter who said them. 100. You know what? That's a good night out. Okay? And now, The Roommate. I'm about to go to a technical rehearsal. We'll play our first preview at the end of the week. Mia Farrow is returning to the theater after decades. Patti LuPone who has decided she does not want to do musicals for the rest of her life, and who would blame her, is also a superb actress. On the first day of rehearsal, I said to Patti, did it occur to you, has it occurred to you, that the last time you and I met in a rehearsal hall was 50 years ago? That's true. She played Kitty Duval in my production of Soroyan's The Time of Your Life, which was filmed for great performances by Lindsay Law. It was Houseman, Jerry rigged it. I don't know how we did it. You can see it if you want to. There's Kevin Kline, there's Patti LuPone, there's that entire first graduating company in this beautiful production. They were too young. Who cared? But there was Patti. We live within a stone's throw of each other, Mia, Patti, and me. And these two remarkable women, with another remarkable woman named Jen Silverman, who's making her official Broadway debut, will gather together at the end of this week and face the music. And I'm still doing it. I think that's the end, but it might not be.